so far. Hope that it continues to be good. We started on Samuel a little bit and kind of got through that beginning of, Hannah and her vow to God and how God answered that, and then her leaving Samuel with Eli, and Eli taking Samuel in to raise him. It's an interesting story. I think when you look at a book like Samuel, especially 1st and 2nd Samuel, it really is a story. I mean, it's a history. But the beautiful thing about it is that it's not just this historical setting, it's this godly historical setting, and these people who were motivated by God, and God intervened to do these great things. But we have so many lessons in this book, so many lessons about God, about how he deals with man, how we should be, the people we should be, about obedience to God, right? I think I've had baptism questions. It's interesting that Aaron got up, talked about baptism this evening, and I think it's one of those things that we sometimes we're accused of being water regenerationalists. I don't know if you've ever been accused of that or not, but it's all in the water, right? It's all in the baptism, but that's not true, is it? We know salvation is a process, right? It's not just a single thing. But with anything in life, with anything you do, there's always one point in that whatever it is you're doing where you're done. It's just how it is, right? Doesn't matter what you're doing. There's one point where that's it. You're done, right? And I think when you talk about salvation or about being saved, baptism becomes that point, that focal point where we know that's done. It's our covenant with God. It's where we sign the contract. We touch the blood, right? Romans 6, right? Don't you know you're baptized into Christ? I'm baptized into his death, right? So the idea, that's where we emulate that gospel. That's where we participate in the gospel. So anyway, we'll have to visit that some maybe. The problem with Samuel is the problem with Eli was his sons, right? It's really interesting that, Eli didn't have good sons. And it's always been kind of a thing. Samuel's sons are going to go the same way. Aaron's sons, they kind of went the same way. So you kind of wonder, what's the problem, right? Why did Aaron was the high priest before God, right? And then his sons offered strange fire to the Lord, were destroyed, right? Eli's sons are going to be wicked before God. Samuel's sons are going to be wicked before God. You kind of wonder why. Why do we have this repeating cycle of these sons being disobedient to God when the fathers are like the very obedient to God, and yet the sons tend to fall off of that? And I think there's a real lesson in that for us. The Bible says, as this text says, that Eli's sons were worthless men. That's pretty much sums it up. They were worth nothing, worthless. That means no value, right? Eli's sons had no value, and so they didn't do what Eli did. The interesting thing about it, though, is that it explains here exactly why they were as bad as they were. And there's so many things in this that really parallel us if we just kind of think about it a little bit. And maybe I can try to make that make more sense. But when he was offering a sacrifice, a priest's servant would come while the meat was boiling, and a 3-pronged fork in his hand, and he would thrust it in the pan or the kettle or a cauldron or pot, and all that the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. Thus they did in Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Also, before they burned the fat, the priest's servant would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, "Give the priest meat for roasting, as he will not take boiled meat from you, only raw." Now, what's the problem with that, right? The problem is God told the priests exactly what they could take. They were allowed to put a fork in the pot and pull out what was there. They weren't allowed to take what was raw. They didn't want to do that, see. He said, the man said, they must surely burn the fat and then take as much as you desire. And he would say, no, but you shall give it to me now, and if not, I will take it by force. Thus the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, for the men despised the offering of the Lord. So in other words, God had told them specifically, this is what you can take. Priests were allowed to take certain meat, certain things from the offering. That was how they ate. That was their sustenance. Priests were allowed to do that. God put that provision in. But they couldn't take it raw because that was sacrificed to God. It could only be after the sacrifice they were allowed to take a certain amount of that in a certain way, and that was for them. That was for their sustenance. Here they despised that. With Aaron's sons, they let the fire go out, right? They offered strange fire to the Lord, and God burned them up, right? God burned them up. Why does that mean to us, see? Well, what it means is that worship's important. You know, that's what you get, that's what you have to take away from this. Worship to God is important. It's not, we can do it wrong. We can worship, we can profane our worship. We can do worship wrong. And profaning is what the word in the Old Testament, that's what comes up and up and up. You're profaning the worship of God, profaning the name of God. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. What does that mean? What exactly does that mean? How do you take the Lord's name in vain? Exactly. Don't tell me it's a cuss word because you're missing the point. But how do you take it in vain? Common. You make it common, right? Whenever you make God's name common, and we're guilty of that. I think I'm guilty of that sometimes, right? Whenever we take that name of God and we make it common, we profane it. Profane means common. You know, most cuss words are really, by themselves, are not cuss words. Am I right? They're just words. Am I right? They're just words, right? But we make them curse words and make them cuss words. What do we do to them? How do we make them? How do we shift it and take a word that's a normal word, right? But now it's a curse word. Why? How do we do that? How do we do that? We change Well, you change the intensity, right? You say it so much, right? You profane the word, right? In other words, you change the meaning of the word. You profane it. You make it common. You change it into something that it's not. And when we hear that word, we know we say that person is cussing, right? And we call that what? What? Profanity. Word profanity comes from the word profane, right? That's where we get that word. Worship to God can be profaned, right? How do we profane God's worship? How do we do that? Add to it, take it away. Go through the motions without the heart, right? We forget why we're doing it, right? Sometimes we forget why we're doing it. You know, I do that. I mean, sometimes I get so worried. I guess it's a preacher thing. But sometimes I get so worried about everybody and everything and what's going on and who's here and who's not and who's upset and who ain't and what person that might upset if somebody does it this way or somebody leads a prayer the wrong way or if song leader does something or I'm always kind of in this mode, because I want it to go good for everybody, I want us to be, I worry about that, right? So, I mean, sometimes I drift away, from that because I get so caught up in the motion, so caught up in it's like it's hard for a preacher really to worship. Does that make any sense? It's almost hard for a preacher to really worship, which seems kind of wrong, but it's just hard sometimes because my mind is a million places anytime we're here. I'm already thinking about what I'm going to say, what I'm going to preach on, how that's going to go, who I might offend, how I'm going to approach that. I'm always summing up the audience. If somebody in here's had a problem over something I'm going to be preaching over, I think, should I do that a little different? Should I word that a little different? You know, you don't realize everything that goes on in my brain on a Sunday morning, you know, and then I miss, even at that, I mess up, you know, but the point is that it's really easy for us to make, the other reason we profane is to make it common, right? Make it common. You know, worship should be different. It should be set apart, sanctified, holy. It's different. It's supposed to be different. You know, what happened here is that they took what God said to do, and they didn't do it the way God said to do it, which is wrong, number one. They didn't do it the right way. They weren't obedient to what God said. But the other thing they did is that they actually robbed God of sacrifice because they took it before it was ever sacrificed, right? They robbed God of sacrifice. So this is yeah. Uh-huh. Because the form sometimes takes us away from God. Um, my Aunt Audra, I always think of my Aunt Audra when we get in these discussions. My Aunt Audra was a different person. She was she's an intelligent gal. She was going to World War II. She went to Camp Lejeune, wound up getting some sort of sickness or something, never deployed overseas, never was quite right after that, always kind of struggled with her health. Always wound up in the VA. They were always giving her something, but she was Eastern Star, you know. She'd put on big fancy dinners. She was always at church. She had two sons, my cousins, Steve and Dan, you know. Steve and Dan were kind of like me, raised up with my grandmother. You know, always talk about my grandmother, you know, the influence my grandmother had on me, which was just tremendous, you know. Kind of the same deal, you know. They were a little bit older than me, just missed Vietnam, kind of hippies. They were definitely hippies, not kind of hippies. They were hippies, like the minibus and the whole deal, right? But they were, but to them, what they saw in church, I'm going to use that word kind of loosely, but what they saw in church, what they saw in religion was form. They didn't know God. They never met God there. They knew, they went, she made them go, made them there every time the doors opened. She drug them by the ear, you know, they were there. But what they saw was a woman in their mother, which is interesting because, you know, I saw my grandmother, my mother and my aunt. Even though my mother was a fairly faithful woman, I don't think my mother alone would have ever got me there. It was my grandmother. But what they saw was this woman who went to church, who wasn't a well person, really, and who struggled with issues, mental issues. But she came to church, always dressed to the top, my aunt, always dressed to the top. Everything was great. Everything was good. Everything was wonderful as long as she was in that building. You know, once she left that building, it was a different story. What they saw was this place where people came and put on this facade and wasn't real. And what they saw was a building and a lot of people who came, and their opinion, their view was that it was hypocritical. People weren't honest. People weren't real. And in the midst of all that, they found the form of religion. They found the form of it, but they never knew God, never met God. You know, you can get so wound up in the form. That's what we have to be, I think that we have to be careful about that. Because I think people, and I think we're way better about this than we were 20 or 30 years ago. Would you agree with that? People have been in the church for 20 or 30 years. We're way better about this than we were 30 years ago, you know. 30 years ago, we dressed to the hilt. We showed up in suits and dresses and hats, and maybe 40 years ago, we showed up in suits, dresses, and hats, and we smiled, and we said everything was okay, and we shook everybody's hand, and the world was a wonderful place, right? So I think we're more real now than we were then. But you can not know God. You can come to church and not know God. You can know the form of religion and not know God. You can understand the principles. You can understand the dogma. You can understand the tradition. You can understand the format and not know God. I mean, you can come to worship every Sunday of your life and never miss a service and not be saved. Do you agree with that? You know, you can, because you don't know God, you know, and I think that's what you get here. They knew the form. They knew their dad was a priest. They knew what they did, but to them, it didn't mean anything to them. They didn't know God. To them, it was, if they had, they would have never done what they did. You know, they would have never done what they did if they had really known God, right? If they had really known what it was about. So, you know, I think the parallel, there's a lot of parallels here. And we could go to a lot of different places in the Old Testament, a lot of places in the Old Testament that really cover this same type of theory, same type of idea. As I think we walk a fine line sometimes, don't we? As Christians, maybe. To be the people that I think people expect us to be the people that God expects us to be. Sometimes those don't always jive, you know. God, I think God, don't know how I would say it. I think we're good here, you know. I feel like, I don't think it's an issue here. I mean, I think I've been places it was an issue, but I don't think it's an issue here. I think we have a good relationship, I hope, between the pulpit and the congregation, between our elders and the congregation. I hope we have a good relationship, you know, an honest relationship. I've really been on this thing like the last 3 years. I've been on this kick. I haven't preached about it yet, but been on this kick the last 3 years about real Christianity, you know. I don't know that I have it 100% figured out yet, but it's like, because I go to work every day and I deal with people every day. I'm not the typical preacher, I guess. You know, I know I go to these preachers' lectureships and stuff, and them guys and me, we're not the same people. I mean, I don't know how to say it. We're just not the same people. You know, they gripe about things that to me are just, I just can't even understand it. You know, I had one preacher said he had to preach 50 times a year. I'm just like, you want me to feel sorry for you? You know? So, you know, I just don't, I'm not on the same level, you know, because I do deal with things. I deal with people. I deal with employees. You know, I have to fire people. I have to hire people. I have to deal with customers. I have to deal with all these different things in my life. And at the same time, I have to think people are looking at me as a preacher, and I need to do it right. I need to act right. And yeah, it's a struggle. You know, because the truth is that we kind of put this idea of Christianity on this plane of perfection, and it's like I can be this perfect Christian, but not out here. You know, but that isn't what God ever did. God said, no, you got to be the Christian out here. You got to be that Christian in the world. Right? Isn't that what he said? I'm not going to take you out of the world and put you in the world. And to me, somewhere we make this division that we can't make, because I have to have a faith. This is my theory. I have to have a faith. I have to be able to walk in this world as a Christian and deal with really difficult things as a Christian, even though sometimes people are going to look at me and say, well, he's a Christian. You know, why is he doing it that way, right? Or why did he do that, or whatever. And to me, that's what Christianity has to be. It has to be real. Why did my cousins not embrace God? Because it wasn't real to them. It wasn't real. It was two worlds. It was this world and it was that world. And they didn't line up. And she didn't take God into this world. God was here, but once she left here, she left that too. You know, she didn't carry it with her. And you can't do that. you have to have a faith. You have to have a belief, a faith, a theology. I don't know the exact proper word, but you have to have something that works everywhere, right? That works everywhere, not just in here, but everywhere. Because otherwise, what good is it? You know, God give us, Jesus walked on this earth. He walked in a mean, cruel, bad world, right? And the truth, even though we don't know the whole story, and I wish we knew the whole story, but the truth is Jesus lived 30 years here as a normal person, right? We don't know much about them 30 years, but he walked on this earth for 30 years just like you and I do. He got up and went to work for 30 years. I wish we knew more about those 30 years. But we don't. You know what we know about? The last 3. Right? We have to have a faith that walks with us every day. We have to have a God that's with us every day. You can't step in and out. So, I know I'm probably getting off track here, but it's really important to me that we can carry God out of this building and not feel like somehow we're letting somebody down. We're either letting God down, we're letting people down, we have to be able to carry him out of this building. And in order to do that, faith has to be usable. It can't be something you just put on the shelf. Faith has to be something you can use every day. You can use it in your life every day. Otherwise, what good is it? We want to make it like a showcase thing, you know, like we want to set our faith up on the shelf. But that's not what it is it? It's not anything about that. And I think for me, sometimes it's hard going through my week, going through some of the things that happen to me sometimes in a week, and then getting up here and preaching on Sunday morning. I know sometimes I need to respond to my own sermon. I mean, I'll be honest, you know, there's times I need to walk the aisle and talk to myself a little bit, you know. I know that. But I think I hope we all know that. And I hope that we I hope we love each other enough to get through it, I guess. I mean, I don't know what else to say. But I think if we don't carry our faith outside of here, that's why we lose our children. That's why we lose our grandchildren. That's why we lose them. Because they don't know God. They know faith. They know church. They know form. But they don't know God. And if we can't give people faith that's theirs, then we lose them. I mean, that's our problem with children, my children. You know, I remember the first time, my kids were grown. Shannon goes to Oklahoma Christian, and she goes over there, and they have this deal, Oklahoma Christian deal, where they have this big worship thing and welcome them and all that. And when she come, and for the first time in her life, when she opened that door, and she was excited, and I could see it in her eyes, and she started talking to me about what was going on. And for the first time in my life, at whatever she was, 19 or 20 years old, I thought, she's actually got her own faith. Yeah, I mean, you can't give faith to a kid. You can't force it down their throat, right? I mean, you can't make them take it. So, they can't use your faith, right? Can't use your faith. And at some point, if you can't give your child, if your child does not embrace their own faith, then they won't be here. I'm just telling you, straight up. That's how it is. Right? And statistically, we know that if only the mother brings children, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's around 20% of those kids actually remain faithful if only their mother brings them. If only their father takes them, it's around 40%. If their mother and father both take them, it's around 80%. You know, now I'm not a big person in statistics, but that proves the point, right? If they don't see it in their home, they're not going to embrace it. It's not going to become theirs. We influence our children. I know I'm getting off track, I'm sorry, but we influence our children and our grandchildren by everything we say, how we talk about this, how we talk about worship, and I've been guilty of that, you know, and I really criticize myself for that because I can't tell you the times that we came to church and, you know, we never missed. I mean, well, we don't never miss now, but it's kind of like we're supposed to be here now, but we never missed before I was supposed to be here, you know. We just didn't. I mean, we were here every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. We never missed. You know, we had our kids with us in tow every time the door was open. We were here. And you know, I think but that's not going to save your kids, but it helps. You know what I'm saying? But when we walked out of here, sometimes the first thing we said was, oh, that was really a bad sermon. Or, you know, that song leader, he was just, you know, I just hate him when he leads singing. Or, you know, that guy that leads prayers, he just goes on and on and on, you know. And I'm ashamed of myself because, you know, our kids, what did they get? What was my impression? What did I impress on my children when we left this building? You know, I think a lot more times when I left the building, it was negative. And I mean, I don't know that I perceived it as being, but I'm thinking at how it went with a child. You know, what's your child hearing? You know, they're hearing, well, that was a miserable experience, and I don't really know why we're going. You know what I mean? You know, when I could have said, boy, that was really good, or what did you get out of that today, or something positive. And even if I had something, and I really beat myself up for this, if I had something negative to say, or me and Susie had something negative to discuss, you know, we should have done that on our own. You know, we shouldn't have done that in front of our kids. Because when we do that, they were hearing, what were they hearing, right? They were hearing, oh, that's a miserable place, and then people are, right? Then people are whatever, you know, and why? You know, why did I do that? What happened here? You know, what did they see with Eli? What did Eli teach those kids? You know, who failed here? Who failed in this story? The kids or Eli? Right? What did Eli teach those kids? Oh, I got to get up and do that every day, and I got to go do that sacrifice every day. And I'm so tired of boiled meat, and I don't know why the Lord only gives me boiled meat, and right? I mean, you know, I'm just saying, right? I mean, that's what he did every day. You get tired of boiled meat after a while, too, I'll bet you. You know, you'd probably be ready for a Big Mac after a while, you know what I'm saying? But what did they hear? What did they hear from him? Right? Well, who failed, you know, in this story? Well, I mean, they failed too, but I'm just saying, Eli failed these kids because he didn't give them God. He gave them the form, he told them what to do, but he didn't tell them why they were doing it. This thing here, when his mother would come back to see him, Samuel was ministering before the Lord as a boy wearing a linen ephod, which that ephod is that's that piece on a Jew, you know. You see it goes down. And she would bring him a little robe from year to year, but come up with her husband to offer a yearly sacrifice. Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife, say, may the Lord give you children from this woman in place of the one she dedicated. And they went to their own home, and the Lord visited Hannah, and she conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew before the Lord. So you kind of start to get the picture of the story, you know. You've got this priest who's been there a long time. His sons are worthless guys, don't know God. Samuel comes in. Samuel's growing before the Lord. And when it says growing before the Lord, it doesn't just mean that he was growing up. It means he was growing spiritually in that context. He was spiritually growing before the Lord. So Samuel had a propensity, if you want to put it that way, for God. This is out of 1 Chronicles 6. It says, Jezebel along with the Lord, went along with the Lord, carried Judah and Jerusalem away into exile by Nebuchadnezzar. The sons of Levi were Gershom, Kohath, and Merari. These are the names of the sons of Gershom, sons of Koah, So these are these Levites. Levites according to their father's household. And that gets you down to Elkanah. If you look, the sons of Kohath. Now Kohath, if you have to go back into before Samuel, have to go back into Exodus, but the sons of Kohath are the ones that rebel before the Lord. Anyway, another story. But Elkanah and his son, this is where you get down to Elkanah. So, and he had other sons here too. So, you know, this is a lineage. This is a priestly lineage. You're born into it. Now, Samuel's not part of this lineage. So, you say, well, how can Samuel be a priest? You know, because he's not actually born into this lineage, born into this, you know, but he is, right? Because if you look at 23, whose name do you got there? Elkanah, right? So Samuel is actually part of that lineage. But the trick of it is he's actually not. There was three different tribes of Levi that performed three different tasks. Okay? So he actually wasn't part of the tribe that actually was supposed to be the one to minister, but he was of that tribe. He was of Levi, so he was of that tribe. So he was able, God called him, God was able to make him, he became a priest. Samuel actually becomes a priest. We actually call Samuel a judge, and Samuel's a seer. So Samuel's someone who God actually reveals, prophetically God reveals to. So Samuel was kind of unique in Scripture. Eli was very old. He heard all his sons were doing, how they lay with the woman who served at the doorway of the tent of meeting. So not only were they stealing the food, they were laying with these women. They were having sexual relations with these women who were at the tent of meeting. So you can kind of get an idea of how bad these guys are. And Eli says to him, he says, why do you do such things? The evil things that I hear from all these people. No, my sons, for the report is not good, which I hear the Lord's people circulating. If one man sins against another, God will mediate for him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who will intercede for him? But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for the Lord desired to put them to death. So just as in Levi's sons, God was going to punish them. God was going to punish them. God was going to kill them. God was going to put them to death for what they did. So now the boy Samuel was growing in stature and in favor, both with the Lord and with men. So Samuel, on the other hand, was increasing. And then a man of God came to Eli. So a prophet comes to Eli, and he says, thus says the Lord, did I not indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in bondage? God always goes way back, you know, because this is a generational ancestry type thing. Did I not choose them from all the tribes of Israel to my priests to go up to my altar to burn incense, to carry an ephod before me? And did I not give them to the house of your father all the fire offerings of the sons of Israel? Why do you kick at my sacrifice and at my offering, which I have commanded in my dwelling? And honor your sons above me by making yourself fat with the choicest of every offering of my people Israel. Therefore the Lord God of Israel declares, I did indeed say that your house and the house of your father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me will be lightly esteemed. So God's basically said, you are going to walk for me forever, your lineage is going to walk for me forever, but now that you've done this, I'm going to break that covenant. The Lord, behold, the days are coming, I will break your strength and the strength of your father's house, so there will not be an old man in your house. You will see the distress of my dwelling in spite of all the good that I do for Israel, and an old man will not be in your house forever. Yet I will not cut off every man of yours from my altar, so that your eyes will fall from weeping and your soul grieve, and all the increase of your house will die in the prime of life. This will be a sign to you which will come concerning your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. On the same day both of them will die. But I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will do according to what is in my heart and in my soul, and I will build him an enduring house, and he will walk before me, anointed always. So God basically has told him, nobody's going to live to be old. So I'm going to cut everybody off in the prime. You're not going to have any old people before me. I'm going to cut off your lineage. I'm going to cut off your strength. that I'm going to raise up somebody, raise up a priest to walk before me. So as God often does, God's got another plan here. But he's going to punish this house. And in the Old Testament, when God often would punish a house, in other words, a lineage, he would do it for generations. So this is the case here. He's going to cut them off generationally. It's not the first time this happened in the Old Testament. This happens all the time. God cuts off the lineage. Because in that society, in that world, it was all about lineage. It was all about your son, your heir, it was all about lineage. So the worst thing God could do, because the Israelites, a lot of Jews believed, and still believe, a lot of Jews believe that I'm going to use, I'll probably say this wrong, but basically, your eternity was because of your lineage. In other words, they really didn't believe in heaven, eternal soul like you and I believe in. Most Jews today don't believe in an eternal soul. They don't believe in eternity, heaven. They don't believe in that like you and I do. To them, most Jews, it's totally a different scheme. What they do believe, though, and say, well, why did they do it? Why did they walk faithful? Why did they serve God? Because if they didn't think there would be eternity. You remember in the New Testament, the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. Remember that? Sadducees, they were sad, you see, right? Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, right? And people say, well, why would they serve God? Why would these Jews, throughout all these centuries, why would they serve God? Why would they do what God said? Why would they be concerned if they didn't think that they had an eternal soul? They didn't believe in heaven, didn't believe in an eternity, right? The reason is because they thought that was their eternity. In other words, it was their offspring, it was their lineage, and they thought if you lived a good life, God would bless your lineage. God would bless you throughout your lineage, and that's carried out in the Old Testament, that idea. So if I could do good, my children, you see, you remember when the man born blind, right, and the disciples asked Jesus, they said, who sinned, this man or his parents? Remember that? That what they thought is they thought, well, since if the parents sinned, it would hurt the lineage. In other words, they punished the man, he was born blind because of a sin of the parents. That was Jewish thought. Remember when Job lost everything and the friends showed up and what do they want to know? What did you do? Right, because in their opinion, God had punished. God had cut off Job's lineage. He killed all his children. You see what I'm saying? That's the worst thing God could do. He cut off his descendants. So Job had no descendants. Remember that? Abraham. Why was Abraham so distressed? Because I don't have any descendants. So a lot of their thought is okay, if I'm faithful and do what God says, and I'm righteous and I do all these things, that even though I might not think I have an eternal soul, I might not think I'm going to go to heaven, or I might not think heaven's an option, it's going to bless my descendants, my lineage, and I'm going to live on in the seed. You see what I'm saying? Isn't that, because you're going to live on in that seed, basically. So it was a really big thing. And so when God tells Eli, I'm going to cut off your lineage, that was the worst thing God could do. That's almost like God saying you're not going to get heaven to Eli. Does that kind of make sense? I'm going to take away your lineage. So when God said this, even though you and I would be like, well, that doesn't matter to me. I mean, I'm probably going to most of them people anyway. Or maybe we would say that. I don't know how we'd say that. But to Eli, it was this terrible prophecy because basically it was saying, I'm going to cut off your eternity. I'm going to cut off your lineage. So we really kind of got to wrap our mind a little bit in this Old Testament thought about why this is really such a big deal. And we're going to see this play out in this story that we're reading. So anyway, thanks for your time this evening. I know I rambled a little bit. Thanks for putting up with me. We'll see y'all, I hope, Sunday morning.